Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries RPG podcast. I'm your host, John, and today in this bonus voicemail episode, we're going to be responding to some of your lovely call-ins. Cue the music. And first up, we have a few calls about our recent Abominable Snowman episode. The first is from Joe over at the Hind Sightless podcast. Definitely give that a listen if you get a chance. Take it away, Joe.
Hey, what's up, you two? Awesome to hear you back on the mic, Hannah. I love the Abominable Snowman. I especially love his North American cousin, Bigfoot. I've recently just dove head first into the insane ocean that is the Bigfoot community and people who go out looking for Bigfoot. There are all sorts of crazy theories out there on why you can't find Bigfoot. Look up ultrasound. Look into ultrasound. It's the thing some big cats can do, like lions and tigers. It really messes with human perceptions, and there are theories that Bigfoot can do, and that's one of the reasons he's so hard to find. So I would give him super crazy mind powers and shit. But if I was to do Hannah's idea where it's like Mr. Jenkins is really the Yeti, I would have the party figure that out. But at the very end of the adventure, like out in the woods, the party hears something and they catch sight of something like moving through the woods, and it's spooky and awesome. Great stuff. Peace out.
Thanks very much for the call in, dude. Much appreciated. Yeah, I think you could definitely do that if you wanted to go the sort of Scooby-Doo method, have the hint that although this was like a fake monster, there's actually a real one out there. Although again, I think it'd be a bit difficult to do in a bit more difficult to do in D&D style games when there's so many monsters knocking around anyway. Whereas if you're playing, I suppose, a more sort of like covert game where like monsters aren't really like publicly known, that'd probably work better. I think again you'd have to be wary of the sort of revelation of it being old Mr. Jenkins not being too much of an anti-climax, but I think one way of dealing with that is to have that as a sort of midway point, and then once you've discovered that no, this one's fake, but potentially some of the clues or whatever lead to the point towards the existence of a real Bigfoot, then that could become the sort of main quest, I suppose. I think that's a really good idea. Thank you for suggesting it. Next up we have Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. He's got a few things to say about the Sasquatch as well.
Hey, Hannah and John. Thank you for doing the Abominable Snowman episode. Really enjoyed it. I think my favorite Abominable Snowman movie is probably Pottersville, 2017 comedy.
Pottersville, you say? It's not a film I'm aware of, to be honest, Jason. Who's it got in it?
It's got Michael Shannon, Judy Greer, Thomas Lennon, Ron Perlman, Christina Hendricks, Ian McShane.
Ian McShane, you say? Well, sold. I've been a fan of Ian McShane's ever since he was in the TV series Lovejoy, and beyond that to things like Deadwood, American Gods, and stuff like that. So I will definitely be giving this a watch at some point.
It is a Christmas movie with furries and Bigfoot and all kinds of great stuff. And it definitely puts that idea that the people looking for the creature are more important than the creature. So check out Pottersville. I think it's a fun watch.
Thanks for the recommendation, Jason. Although I've got so many good recommendations of Jason, I'm going to start calling them Recommend Jasons. Just my little joke there. What can I say? I'm getting old a bit. The dad jokes have started to come in. But the more you talked about it, the more it did sound vaguely familiar. So it's possible I did watch it years ago, but don't really remember the details. But I will definitely see if I can track down a copy of that.
As far as doing the bait and switch Scooby-Doo thing, I've done that once before. I was running Colonial Gothic using ICRPG for Pete Jones and my son, and they were sent to investigate reports of the Jersey Devil. And basically, the gentleman they were there trying to help had this piece of property that was valuable.
Jinkies.
And some of the neighbors were trying to scare him off the property so they could get control of it. And they had made this silhouette of the Jersey Devil they would show at night, like in moonlight, so you would see this thing in the woods, and were doing things trying to scare him off. But there actually was some occult activity going on. There was a real Jersey Devil running around, too. So the players found the fake Jersey Devil, and then they ended up having to track down the real Jersey Devil as well. but that was the only time I've kind of used that in the game. But I definitely think you could do it successfully. And if you do something like that, and that's all that Legend of Sleepy Hollow is, right? Brom Bones pretends to be the Headless Horseman, but then there ends up being a real Headless Horseman.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, Jason, it's not really a new thing, despite the fact Scooby-Doo sort of popularised it, of having someone manufacturing a supernatural explanation to cover up dodgy goings on. I mean, the one that pops immediately to my mind is the Hound of the Baskervilles, the Sherlock Holmes story, where a dog is basically covered in phosphorescent paint, if I remember correctly, and used to fake the curse of the Baskerville family. So there's a long history going back in literature and film of people faking the supernatural for some nefarious ends. As I've said a few times, though, I think you've got to be careful in a game like D&D where there's a profusion of real, in inverted commas, monsters out there. But I think if the purpose of the scenario and your player group are up for it is not to just tonk the monster with broadswords, but to investigate the mystery, then something like this could still be very fun if your group is up for it. Next up, we have a couple of calls about our episode where I was talking about what you could do if you draw a blank and where you could get inspiration from. And our first call is from Glenn Hallstrom, aka Old Man Grognard. Check out the Radio Grognard podcast if you've not listened to that. So, what's on your mind, Glenn?
Hitting it out of the park again. I like that episode about hitting a blank spot. With me, you can't think of anything to write. With me, substitute game session for episode of podcast, because I have the same problem.
And just to make anyone aware who's not already listening to Radio Grognard, Glenn puts out a podcast pretty much every day. It's always informative and fun to listen to, and his output is pretty prodigious. So I can understand that sometimes, it might be a little bit difficult to keep that flow of ideas going, but somehow he always manages it. I've been putting out more episodes sort of every weekday recently, and it is a challenging thing to do sometimes. I'm in awe of the fact that Glenn's been doing it for a fairly long time and shows no signs of slowing down in the future. Long may it continue.
But as far as like prepping goes, yeah, I'm a film buff, so I've got tons to take, to draw from. I've got a whole bunch of like old Mill Creek, Public Domain, and other things of different genres that I watch once in a while for inspiration, or regular movies. I've used things like I've done a Hyperborea session based on a spaghetti western, and it worked out great. For some reason, westerns work out great for fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Westerns work out really great for that. I think it's partly that idea of, like the posse all coming together to face off against a common enemy or situation. And obviously not just for fantasy, but it works pretty well for sci-fi as well. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the original Star Wars stuff is pretty much a Western in space.
I also, I'm going to have to be writing a Gangbusters game pretty soon for the convention, North Texas. And what I'll probably do is watch some of my film noirs or my gangster movies, or my copy of the complete Untouchables, the old Robert Stack series. Great for that kind of thing. Just think about genre. That's what I say. Anyway, great episode, man. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks very much for the call in, Glenn. Much appreciated. Yeah, I've got to admit, I'm not really familiar with the original Untouchables series, although obviously I've seen the film Untouchables and very much enjoyed that. I know you've spoke about Gangbusters a few times in the sort of latest iteration, Gangbusters BX, I believe it was, and I really need to get round to having a look at that, since I've run a few games set in sort of Prohibition era America, but not that particular system. Weirdly enough, it's always been like World of Darkness games and stuff like that. But I think you make a very good point, sometimes stepping outside of the perceived genre you're running to get inspiration can lead to some surprising and interesting ideas. That's a great tip there. Thank you very much. And next up we have Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, who also wants to talk about what you should do when you draw a blank and maybe the well of inspiration has run a little bit dry. Go ahead, Jason.
Hey, John, Jason here. Your what to do when you draw a blank episode was great. I draw from movies and novels and, sometimes modules. What I like to do is genre swap. So I will, watch something like sci-fi and then take the base idea and adapt it over to fantasy or vice versa, things like that. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons is really more or less a Western. I realize it's medieval trappings, but the world's more like a wild American Wild West kind of thing. So it's easy to adapt Western plots over there, from Western movies and Western TV shows and whatever. The other thing I wanted to mention is news stories. I've wanted to run a game where I use news stories and would actually give the players, because we're playing online, links to real news stories.
That is an absolutely great idea, Jason. Thank you very much for the call in. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, and a lot of newspapers now, they have like back issues and articles and stuff like that available for free online that can serve as a great resource. If I remember correctly, I did either a YouTube video or a blog post, or probably years ago now, I forget, about sort of how you could take a news article and sort of twist it to fit it in different genres of game. So whilst I think, yeah, you definitely and absolutely could do like a modern world game using stories as inspiration, obviously with a bit of sensitivity if it's more recent stuff, but you can also just take the sort of like the core of a news story and you can tweak it to fit different genres, as you were talking about you can do with Western plot lines for D&D.
There were some news stories, and this is maybe 5 years ago now, or I don't know how long ago, but there was a guy that was caught in a house that was supposed to be a haunted house. He had a katana with him and a Bible, and he was obviously mentally unhinged, but that's a great basis for some kind of modern game, right? Was he unhinged, or was he really after something? In a modern investigation game, whether you're doing, something like Delta Green or whatever.
Yes, absolutely. That could be a great sort of hook or inspiration for a Hunter-style game. Now, I've ran a few Hunter the Reckoning games from the Old World of Darkness sort of series of games, and in that, you're basically people who've been blessed, in inverted commas, by these mysterious sort of angelic entities that suddenly make you slightly more proof against monstrous mind magics and give you the ability to sense monsters and to strike back against them. But one of the sort of potential downsides of the game is that the vast majority of humanity has not received that blessing, so to them you seem like dangerous, unhinged criminals. And also in the game originally there was a little bit of uncertainty about what these messengers' aims were in like blessing people. Were they really blessing people, or were they perhaps corrupting them and shaping their visions to have them target specific creatures, or were they even creatures at all? Later on it was revealed that yes, they were, but certainly earlier on I found that sort of uncertainty far more intriguing than the eventual resolution.
Another one, there was in Philadelphia, they found all these body parts in gym bags shoved in a dumpster, which is, really heinous, but obviously you can do something with that in a modern horror game. So I was going to do a modern horror game and then link to those news stories, have the players find that and tie them all together in the plot as clues, but then they could actually go and really use Google in real life to find links to stories.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great idea. And as I said earlier, it's so easy to get hold of sort of semi-historical or modern news stories nowadays that it almost seems foolish not to use this smorgasbord of inspiration that is spread out in front of us. That is a great tip there, Jason. Thank you very much. Now we're getting on near to the 15-minute mark, so I'm going to wrap up this episode. We still have some more voicemails to respond to, so if your message hasn't been answered in this episode, don't worry, we're going to put out another one in a couple of days and we'll address the remaining voicemails there. So if you want to get in touch with us and maybe chat about what you do when you draw a blank, or any of the other topics we've covered, or maybe you just want to have a chat about RPGs in general. We only put out the voicemail response episodes on the podcast at the moment, not on the YouTube channel, but you could be featured in one of these future episodes. If you want to leave us a voicemail, you can do so using SpeakPipe or Anchor. There's a link in the description down below, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.